I heard her car pull into my driveway at 2 in the morning, and something in my chest already knew it wasn't a social visit. I was still in my uniform pants and an old army t-shirt when I opened the front door. My sister Rachel was standing on the porch steps, one hand gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The porch light caught her face before she could turn away from me. I've seen a lot of things in my years as a military police officer. I've responded to bar fights and domestic calls and accidents on base that I still can't unsee. But nothing prepares you for the moment you look at your little sister's face and see a bruise spreading across her cheekbone like a storm cloud. I was down the steps and had my arms around her before she could say a word. She didn't cry right away. That was the thing that scared me most. She just stood there in my arms, completely still, like she had cried herself out long before she made the drive over. Like this wasn't the first time she'd had to hold herself together just to make it through a front door. I brought her inside. I sat her down at my kitchen table and poured her a glass of water without asking. My hands were steady. I made them be steady. One of us had to be. Rachel, I said quietly. Who did this? She wrapped both hands around the glass and stared down at the water. The bruise on her cheek had a yellowish edge. It wasn't brand new. There was a smaller mark near her jaw that she'd done her best to cover with concealer. I fell, she said. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She'd always been the gentler one between us. Even when we were kids, I was the one picking fights on the playground, and Rachel was the one talking everyone back down. She became a kindergarten teacher. She baked birthday cakes for her neighbors. She sent handwritten thank you notes. She was the kind of person the world needed more of, and she was sitting in my kitchen at 2 in the morning telling me she fell. Rachel. My voice was soft, but I put everything I had into it. It's me. She pressed her lips together. Her chin wobbled once, and then she got control of it. It was Derek, she whispered. My husband's name is a phrase I never thought I'd have to say like that, she told me later. Like something shameful. Like something to be whispered in the dark. Derek. Her husband of 3 years. The man who had stood across from her at the altar at Riverside Chapel and promised to love and protect her. The man who had shaken my hand at their rehearsal dinner and called me his favorite sister-in-law. He was the only sister-in-law, I'd told him, laughing. He'd laughed too. I thought about that laugh now. How long? I asked. She was quiet for a long time. About 1.5 years, she finally said. 1.5 years. While I was deployed for 8 months of it, while I was calling her every week from overseas and she was saying everything's fine, I'm fine, Derek says hi. While I was sleeping in a bunk in a forward operating base worrying about IEDs and she was sleeping next to someone who was hurting her, I felt something move through me that I didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't just anger. It was older and colder than anger. Does he know where you are right now? I told him I was going to see a friend. Does he believe you? She hesitated. Probably not. I got up and checked the lock on my front door. We talked until almost 5 in the morning. She told me things slowly, like she was pulling each detail up from somewhere deep, somewhere she buried it to survive. The first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave fingerprints. The way he'd cried afterward and promised it would never happen again. The second time. The 5th time. The way it had shifted over months from something shocking into something she had started to organize her whole life around avoiding. She told me about the time she'd tried to leave 8 months ago, and he'd sat on the kitchen floor and told her that if she walked out that door, he would hurt himself, and somehow she'd ended up being the one comforting him. She told me about their pastor, who had told her privately that a wife's role was to be a stabilizing presence for her husband's struggles. She told me she had no money of her own. That he'd taken her off the joint account 6 months ago and gave her cash for groceries and expected receipts. By the time she finished, the kitchen window had gone from black to gray. I want to call the police, I said. I know, Rachel. I know, Sarah. Her voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, but I've thought about it. I've thought about it so many times. He knows people. His uncle is on the county sheriff's department. The one time I called, they came out and talked to him for about 4 minutes and then left. And when they left, he looked at me across the room and didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I understood what she was telling me. I'd seen it happen to women on base. I'd responded to calls myself and watched the system fail people in real time, not because the officers didn't care, but because the structure made it easy to walk away from. "Okay," I said. "Then we do this differently." She looked at me. I had been out of active duty for 7 months. I was working as a contractor now, doing security consulting, keeping my certifications current out of habit and because I genuinely didn't know how to stop. I was strong, I was trained, and I had spent the last 3 years learning exactly how people like Derek operated, not because I'd studied domestic abuse specifically, but because control and intimidation follow the same patterns whether it's a hostile actor overseas or a man in a house in suburban Ohio. I knew what he was doing. And I knew, more importantly, what he was afraid of. "Tell me his schedule," I said. "Everything. What time he leaves for work, what time he gets home, whether he goes anywhere on weekends. Tell me who his friends are and how often he sees them. Tell me what sets him off and what makes him feel powerful and what makes him feel small." She blinked. "Why?" "Because I'm going to go stay with you for a while," I said, "and I need to know exactly what I'm walking into." She started to shake her head. "Sarah, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask," I said. "I'm telling you." We were quiet for a moment. Outside, a bird had started somewhere in the oak tree in my backyard. "He'll figure out you're not me," she said. "Not right away, he won't." She looked at me for a long moment. "We don't look identical. We're sisters, not twins. But we look enough alike that people mistake us regularly. Same height, same dark hair, same way of holding our shoulders. When we were teenagers, we used to swap classes as a joke. Our own mother mixed us up in photographs sometimes." "That's not a plan," Rachel said quietly. "That's just showing up." "The plan comes after I see what I'm dealing with," I said. "But I'm not letting you go back there alone. Not tonight, not anymore." She pressed her fingers to her lips. For a long moment, I thought she was going to argue. Then she nodded, once, like something had finally broken loose inside her. She slept in my bed. I sat in the armchair by the window with my phone and didn't sleep at all. By morning, I had made a list, not of things to pack or logistics or excuses to tell my own clients. A list of every resource I knew, every contact, every favor I could call in. A friend from my unit who was now a family law attorney in Columbus. A women's shelter, 2 towns over with a director I'd met once at a fundraiser. A detective I'd worked alongside on a joint task force 3 years ago who I trusted to be discreet. I also had a plan. Not a perfect plan, but a real one. Rachel called Derek at 8 in the morning and told him she'd had too much wine at her friend's house and stayed over. She did it from my bathroom with the door closed. I sat on the other side of the door and listened to her voice go careful and small in that way people go when they're managing someone volatile, when every word is a calculation and I had to press my back against the wall and breathe slowly through my nose. When she came out, she said he'd believed her, or at least he'd accepted it, which, with someone like Derek, wasn't really the same thing. We spent the morning going over everything. I took notes. I asked questions she hadn't expected. About his work schedule, his social habits, his relationship with his family, his finances. I asked whether he had weapons in the house, and she told me there was a shotgun in the bedroom closet, unloaded, she thought, and a hunting knife in his truck. I noted both. I asked whether he'd ever threatened to harm himself or others if she tried to leave. She said yes, both. I wrote that down too. I drove her back to the house that afternoon. I parked down the street and watched her walk to the front door. Watched her pause at the steps the same way she'd paused on mine. Gathering herself, armoring up, and then go inside. I sat there for a long time. His truck was in the driveway. The garage door was closed. The house looked completely normal, like 1,000 other houses on 1,000 other streets. And that was the thing about this kind of situation that made it so hard for anyone outside it to understand. There was no smoke. There was no alarm. It looked like a life from the outside. A perfectly ordinary life. I drove back to my apartment and packed a bag. The original plan was to stay nearby and be a visible presence. Someone Derek knew was watching. Someone Rachel could call. Someone who could be at the house in under 2 minutes. That was the cautious plan. The reasonable plan. The plan that kept me at arm's length. That plan lasted about 48 hours. On the second night I was there, Derek came home from a work dinner at 9:30. I was parked on their street. Rachel had told him I was staying with a friend in the neighborhood, and I watched him pull into the garage. I heard his voice from my car when he opened the front door. I couldn't make out words, but I've worked in enough high-stress situations to read the shape of a voice the way some people read faces. I know what controlled aggression sounds like. I know the particular cadence of someone who has decided to punish someone who can't fight back. Rachel texted me at 9:45. Just 3 words. Don't come in. That told me everything. It told me she'd been right that he hadn't fully believed the story about the wine. It told me he was taking it out on her right now, in their kitchen or their living room, and she was trying to protect me from being pulled into it. I sat in my car for 43 minutes. I know because I counted. Then I made a decision. The next day, while Derek was at work, I went to the house. Rachel and I had 2 hours. I walked every room. I noted the exits, the sight lines, the acoustics. I looked at the shotgun in the closet. It was unloaded, as she'd said, and I moved the ammunition to a different location without touching the weapon itself. I'm not interested in escalation. I'm interested in removing variables. I also called my attorney friend in Columbus. Her name was Monica, and she'd seen enough in her career that almost nothing surprised her. I laid out Rachel's situation in the same way I'd brief an operation. Facts, timeline, resources available, risks. Monica listened without interrupting. She needs to document everything, Monica said when I finished. Photos, dates, times, anything she can get. And she needs a safety plan. Not a, maybe someday I'll leave plan. An actual plan with a specific date and a specific place to go. She has a place to go, I said. Mine. Good. What about finances? I explained about the accounts. There are options, Monica said. But she needs to move quickly and she needs to be careful. If he's the type to retaliate when he feels he's losing control. He is, I said. Then the window matters. I spent the next 3 days building that window. Rachel and I talked every morning while Derek was at work. She took photos, quietly and carefully, of every mark she could find, including older ones she'd documented herself in a notes app on her phone, in a folder she'd labeled recipes. When I saw that folder, saw the dates going back almost 2 years, saw her handwriting describing injuries with the same methodical precision you'd use for a grocery list, I had to walk out of the kitchen and stand in the backyard alone for a while. She'd known, some part of her, that she would need evidence someday. She'd been collecting it quietly while also telling herself and everyone else that everything was fine. That's what people don't understand about survival. It isn't passive. It's exhausting, constant, strategic work. Rachel had been fighting this whole time. She'd just been fighting alone. On the 4th day, things changed. Derek came home early. I was still in the house. We'd miscalculated his schedule by about 2 hours. There wasn't time for me to leave without him seeing my car in the driveway. Rachel looked at me. I looked at her. Bedroom, she said. The bedroom was not an option. Not with him between me and every exit. Kitchen, I said. Stay calm. Let me handle the introduction. He walked in and stopped when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table. For a moment he just looked at me. I looked back. I'd been looking at his photograph for 4 days. The social media profile Rachel had shown me, the work headshot, the photo on their wedding announcement in the local paper. He was bigger than I'd expected. Broad through the shoulders with the kind of easy physicality that probably read as confidence in most rooms and something else entirely in a house where someone was afraid of him. He wasn't afraid of me. Not yet. That was clear in the half-second before he rearranged his expression into something sociable. "Sarah," he said. "Didn't know you were in town." "Surprise visit," I said pleasantly. "Figured I'd see my sister." He nodded slowly. He looked at Rachel. I watched him read her face the way predators read things, for information, for leverage, for whatever would be most useful. I watched her work to give him nothing. "How long are you in town?" he asked me. "Not sure yet," I said. "Depends on work." He smiled. It was a very good smile. I'd been in rooms with dangerous people my entire adult life, and the ones with very good smiles were always the ones to watch most carefully. "Well," he said, "we should do dinner while you're here." "Absolutely," I said. He went upstairs to change, and Rachel turned to the kitchen counter and gripped the edge of it with both hands and stared at the backsplash without seeing it. "You okay?" I murmured. "Don't leave tonight," she said, very quietly. "Please." I didn't leave. I stayed for dinner. I stayed through the careful performance of a normal evening. Derek charming and attentive, refilling wine glasses, telling a funny story about a colleague at work, asking me polite questions about my job and my apartment, and whether I was seeing anyone. Rachel quiet and precise, the way you are when you're walking on ice and you know where all the thin spots are. I watched him the whole time. Not obviously. But I watched. He was smart. He was controlled. He understood exactly how he looked to an outside observer, and he was performing for me in the same way an actor performs for a critic they know is in the audience. Nothing he did that night would have looked wrong to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but I knew what to look for. The way he'd pause just slightly too long before answering Rachel's questions, not because he was thinking, but because he was making her wait. The way he'd correct something she said in a tone that was technically pleasant but left no room for disagreement. The way she automatically tracked his movements even when she was talking to me. The way animals track motion at the edge of their vision. By the time I was helping Rachel clear the dinner plates, I was absolutely certain of two things. 1. Derek was never going to stop on his own. 2. Whatever Rachel needed to leave, I was going to make sure she had it. We had the conversation the next morning, with Derek at work and the door locked and both of our phones face down on the table so neither of us would be distracted. "Monica says you have enough," I told her. "The documentation, the photos, the records. She says a family court judge will take it seriously, especially combined with a statement. She has a colleague in family law here in town who she trusts." Rachel stared at her coffee. "He'll say I'm lying," she said. "He might. He'll turn his family against me. His mother, she already thinks I'm difficult." "Maybe. Probably." "His uncle, Monica, has dealt with that before," I said. "It's not as protected as he thinks it is." She was quiet for a long time. "I'm scared," she said finally. "I know. I know you think I'm scared of what he'll do if I leave, and I am, but that's not the main thing." She looked up at me. "I'm scared of what it means. If I leave, then it was real. All of it. It was all real." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "It was already real, Rachel," I said quietly. "It was real every single day. You leaving doesn't make it real. It just means you get to stop living inside it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." We moved fast after that, the way you have to when a window opens, because windows close. Monica's colleague, an attorney named Patricia, met with Rachel the following day and filed for an emergency protective order by the afternoon. I had already moved Rachel's most important documents, passport, birth certificate, a folder of financial records she'd quietly assembled, to my apartment. Derek came home that evening to an empty house and a document from the county court. I know what happened next only secondhand, from the officer who served the protective order, and from Derek's one attempt to reach Rachel by phone before Patricia sent him a letter explaining the terms. He was furious. Of course he was. People like Derek don't accept accountability quietly. They accept it loudly, to anyone who will listen, reframing themselves as the victim, with a fluency that would be impressive if it weren't so predictable. His uncle made some calls. Patricia had anticipated this and had already been in contact with the county prosecutor's office directly, walking the documentation through channels that bypassed the sheriff's department. It took 6 weeks. There were moments I thought Rachel might reverse course. Twice she called me in the middle of the night and I could hear her working through it out loud. The fear and the second guessing and the long conditioning of a year and a half telling her she was the problem. Both times I sat with her through it. I didn't argue, I didn't push, I just stayed on the line. The protective order was made permanent at the hearing. Derek's attorney requested a continuance twice and got it both times, and both times Rachel showed up and sat at that table with Patricia beside her and didn't look away. I sat in the gallery directly in her line of sight, so she'd have somewhere steady to look if she needed it. Derek was ordered out of the marital home. He was required to complete a batterer intervention program as part of the civil proceeding. Patricia was already building toward a criminal filing with the prosecutor's office. He did not go gently. He left things broken in the house. He told people in their social circle that Rachel had manufactured the whole thing. His mother stopped speaking to Rachel, which Rachel had predicted, and grieved privately and then moved on from with a practicality that I thought was one of the bravest things I'd ever seen. She went back to the house for the first time on a Thursday morning with me and a locksmith. We changed every lock. We walked through every room. She opened windows and let the cold autumn air in and stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment, very still. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking it doesn't feel like mine," she said. "I'm thinking I might sell it." "Okay, I'm thinking." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm thinking about my kids at school. I had 23 kindergartners this year and I kept every single one of their drawings and I never told any of them what was happening at home because I didn't want them to feel like something was wrong. I kept showing up." She looked around the room. "I kept showing up for everyone." "I know," I said. "I want to show up for myself now," she said. "There are moments that stay with you. Not because they're dramatic, the opposite actually. Because they're quiet and certain, and you understand while they're happening that they're going to matter." That was one of them. She sold the house in the spring. She's renting a small place across town, close to her school, with a garden in the back that she's been slowly filling with things she chose herself. She got a cat. She named it something ridiculous that makes me laugh every time I say it. She calls me on Sunday evenings. We talk for a long time about nothing in particular. Her students, my work, what we're reading, what we're watching, plans for the holidays. The kinds of conversations we used to have before Derek, before a year and a half of her life went into managing someone else's anger. Patricia's office contacted us last month. The criminal filing moved forward. Derek entered a guilty plea on a misdemeanor assault charge and was sentenced to probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent domestic violence conviction on his record. Patricia told Rachel it wasn't everything, and Rachel said she knew. And then she said something I've been thinking about ever since. She said, "It's enough. It's enough that it's true now, in a way he can't argue with." That's the thing about people who've survived what she survived. They don't need everything. They just need the truth to be somewhere it can't be erased. I'm not a hero in this story. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story gets told, and I know the version where the capable sister swoops in and saves the day, and that's not what happened. What happened is that my sister survived on her own for a long time before she came to my porch. She built the evidence that protected her. She made the phone call to Patricia. She showed up to every hearing. She walked back into that house and decided what she wanted to do with it. What I did was show up and stay. That's what I would tell anyone who has a Rachel in their life. A friend, a sister, a coworker, someone who always seems a little too careful and a little too quiet when their partner's name comes up. You don't have to fix it. You can't fix it. What you can do is show up and mean it and be somewhere safe to land when they're finally ready. Because they will be ready. That's the other thing people don't understand. Given enough support, given enough time, given one person who shows up and stays. People find their way out. Rachel did. I'm so proud of her. I can barely stand it.